you had their initial setup, then their second configuration, and then their third configuration. Now, the first one isn't described as such, but I think I can justify this statement by inference. I believe that the first configuration of the 7 adjutant mind spirits was when... Hello, Goldie. Greetings. Aren't you coming in, Doc? We'll pray for you. We're talking about the 7 adjutant mind spirits, and we'll take up you next. Okay.
We've had to have you in here, too.
I think when the life carriers came here, either then or at some time thereafter, and this would be certainly before the differentiation of animal life, and I could, from the vegetable, yes. The vegetative life came first, and the vegetative life, the mind spirits don't contact vegetative life. This is the lowest level of mind, mechanical mind, non-teachable mind. And that level of mind is manipulated by the master physical controllers. That's the first type of mind that we have. I think this is what we call a tropism. The sunflower's ability to follow the sun. The ability of a tree, when erosion threatens its root structure, to do that superb engineering job which we've all seen trees do, throwing those roots back into the crumbling bank and sacrificing the erect posture for compromising on angles. That's superb engineering that tree does. But this is not knowing, understanding engineering. This is a purely mechanical response to a physical stimulus. The tree can never learn. All trees will react in exactly the same way to erosion. You consider the capillary functions of a tree. What's the weight of a column of water? That would be represented by the sap in a grizzly giant, in a sequoia. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? And yet that tree moves that sap up against gravity. That's first-class engineering. A tree does some more fancy engineering. A tree is a molecule smasher. In fact, any green growing thing is a molecule smasher. And if you try to break the bond between carbon and oxygen in the laboratory, it takes quite a little voltage to do that. But a tree does it casually with chlorophyll in its leaves. It just pulls that molecule right apart using sunlight as its energy. And it absorbs the carbon, breathes out the oxygen, and this is what keeps us going. We reverse the process. We eat the carbon and burn it and breathe out our smoke. Carbon dioxide is the tree's fuel. This is how we keep this planet running. Yeah. There's another story about that too, but I think it's not good for the recording. No, I can tell it delicately. This particular atheist was discussing religion with a farmer. The farmer listened to him. Oh, he said, it can't be so. Well, the atheist says, you have any particular reasons for believing in God? And the farmer says, yeah, I'll show you. Took him around to his compost pile. Now he said, look at that. And he said, when you consider the origin of this compost pile, when you consider that in just a little while it's going to be wonderful black loam, he said only God could have thought of a process so useful and so preservative of the cleanliness of the planet. I think initially these adjutants arrive, are brought here by the life carriers, are sent here by the creative spirit. And I think all 7 of them are here. but all 7 are not functional. I think only the first adjutant, the spirit of intuition, is all the time pecking away at these living organisms that are already minded in a sub-adjutant way. You'll recall that it says here that on Urantia, the spirit of intuition had more trouble making contact than almost any other world in our system, save maybe one.
Oh, that explains it. Why the women got more intuition than men.
Men don't have intuition, they have hunches, honey. Don't you know that?
Women believe everything you told them.
Just like men have no vanity, just pride. And men never gossip, they have bull sessions. We got different words for the same thing.
You need them.
Sure we do. I think you have an overlap and a gray area. For example, what is a sponge? Is a sponge an animal or a vegetable? The papers say that the transition organisms between the animal and the vegetable were not what we have today as sponges, but they were living organisms similar to sponges. They were really transitional life forms. And here you would have a kind of a gray area between the mechanical and the non-mechanical levels of mind, between the non-teachable and the teachable levels of mind, between pre-adjutant mind and the ministry of the lowest of the adjutants, the spirit of intuition. When you get to an amoeba, you have a definite function of adjutant mind, probably one adjutant. Now, I think all 7 were here, but they weren't all functional. And I think this was the original mobilization of the 7 adjutant mind spirits on Urantia. And this lasted until Andon and Fada made their decision to flee. And then the papers say on page 709, there was an immediate and new order of mobilization of the 7 adjutant mind spirits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, you want to
709.
I'd like to
Yes.
ask you to make one correlation. Where do you put virus?
Where do I put a virus? I'm not sure that a virus is alive.
I'm not either. I wonder if it's not pre.
I think a virus is the highest form of non-living matter. I'm guessing now, because I'm out of my field. I think a virus is a virus is not alive, but it's the closest thing to being alive. If anything is dead. Yeah, it can raise hell with microorganisms too.
Now, how would that correlate with what you were saying about that?
I don't think a virus is minded in any way, shape, or form.
But it's almost.
A virus adds on as crystals add on. And you don't have to imply mind to visualize the propagation of crystals, let's say, in a supersaturated solution when it suddenly comes out. You don't have to project mind to explain why snowflakes are always hexagonal. They just form that way. I'm speaking real straight here, but and I'm frankly guessing. I'm not sure. I'm not an authority in this area. The third mobilization of the adjutants, we go to page 734, paragraph 3. told you I did my homework. This takes place when animal life has exhausted the mutable gene potentials for humanity. You see, the life carriers are never dependent on just one set of genes. This thing is a boiling. Example, they've got as much as 500,000 years to get life going on a planet. And I would say that during that time they could replant life if anything happened. This is their first 500,000 years, as long as that. I don't know that they took that long in this world.
What happens if they aren't successful in that time? Are they called in on the carpet?
I don't suppose that's ever happened, Bert. I don't know what would happen.
But there is a limitation there on that.
They can play around with life implantation for as long as 500,000 years. And I would say that they could replant it if something happened.
Leaves
So-
are still good, Bert. They twist off the particle, you move and turn them.
In the course of 500,000 years, yeah, you can redrill.
Redrill. You
I
leave
would-
the first hole.
Yeah, I'd say that gives them plenty of time to get a good, solid base of life going. Now, after that, I don't think they can tinker with replanting. They can maneuver the environment after that. But once you get this second mobilization of the adjutant mind spirits, then they're forbidden to manipulate the environment anymore. Now, the third mobilization takes place. They go on to say here, even if Andon Infanta had died childless, this would not have stopped human evolution, because there were no less than 7,000 favorable strains which could have achieved some sort of human type of development. But long before the material son and daughter arrive, the human potentials of the evolving animal species have been exhausted. This biologic status of animal life is disclosed to the life carriers by the phenomenon of the third phase of adjutant spirit mobilization, which automatically occurs concomitantly with the exhaustion of the capacity of all animal life to give origin to the mutant potentials of pre-human individuals. Now, since they refer to this to the third, I think I'm justified in going back of Andon Infanta and identifying that condition as the first. The first adjutant mobilization was pre-human. The second adjutant mobilization took place with the appearance of the first humans. The third adjutant mobilization, which I suspect is still the case today on Earth, took place when the animal levels had exhausted mutable human potential gene patterns. There could be no new evolution of the human species from the animal orders. The human race is now marooned, cast loose.
And then the next paragraph tells us 2 lines of it. Begins with 2 lines.
What method did they use to restrain? Now, there were 3 implantations on this planet, but only one developed.
They manipulated the environment. One implantation, the Australasian or Eastern, lost so much of its potential germplasm so early that the life carriers, with permission, went in and completed the wreckage of it. And that's why in Australia they never got mammals. You never got beyond marsupials. Now, they took the other 2 implantations, and if you'll recall, they fostered the migration of the North American lemur type into the Asiatic area, picking up genes along the way, and they combined the best gene structure from the remaining 2 implantations to get going on the dawn mammals, the mid mammals, the primates, and so on. Since the third implantation couldn't make it, they just saw to it wouldn't confuse the issue. The third implantation never produced the mammalian level. They got close to it. Or is a marsupial a mammal? It's almost mammalian. Now, the question is, how do these adjutants work? I have for years visualized a human mind as a piece of clothesline. And that clothesline is made up of 7 strands. It's twisted, you know. And just visualize a clothesline lying down the table here. Let's take the clothesline and put a loop in it. We haven't interrupted the circuit, but we now have an individualized portion of this clothesline, don't we? It comes down, then it makes a loop, crosses itself, and goes on. That loop, to me, symbolizes a human mind. Or with 5 or fewer strands, such a loop could symbolize an animal mind, the mind of a dog or a horse. I think that our living cortex, the living brain, maintains the integrity of that loop as long as life persists, for the same reason that life maintains the integrity of the pattern of the living organism. As long as one is alive, one maintains his physical identity in the physical world. And when one dies, that identity is swiftly lost through oxidation processes. I think when we die, the loop is pulled out of the clothesline. And I visualize these adjutants as a clothesline with many, many loops, each one of which is an active brain, an active mind. And the thing that it's looped around is a living brain. I visualize these adjutants as working away.
Did that explain ESP?
Oh, sure, I think so. Yes. Sure, ESP is, I think,
Well,
very,
that's a circuit. That's a computer
it's very
circuit.
valid and very
In
undependable.
other words, you and I are on the same circuit, so to speak. We're all on the same circuit.
I think it's one of the things that explains ESP.
I certainly think so.
But I don't think ESP will ever displace the telephone or telegraph. Because I don't...
Light,
Huh?
not even in the light and light there.
I don't know.
Highly unpredictable. Tied up.
There's more to mind than meets the eye. And I don't... The mere fact that Ryan at Duke, for example, can't work out perfect correlations doesn't mean he doesn't have any correlations. There's something he's measuring something down there. He's probing. And I don't, I would never count on ESP to ever do anything. But on the other hand, I feel quite sure that it does things now and then.
Not sure on explanation
What?
of Ryan.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Star people, it appears to me that no question that they have talent.
Yeah.
But
This could be. I know of instances of things that happen that you can't explain. Well, there's instances of mind action. Oh, where you have the young of a primitive species, say on the insect level, that demonstrate certain behavior which is essential to survival, and they couldn't possibly be taught this because they've hatched out of eggs, and the previous generation all died during the winter, and yet they attack their problems very intelligently. And how did they learn to do this? Who taught them? Who taught engineering to a spider? Yet a spider has a very clear, some kind of a concept of stresses and sound engineering principles. Those webs make sense. I think you could measure IQ in spiders. I think you'd have differential intelligence in any species. Greetings.
May.
A chinch bug never makes a mistake of jumping on a jumping weed instead of wheat.
I get it.
Where do you get that?
I don't know.
Bill, how do you connect or distinguish between ESP and metapsychosis?
What's metapsychosis now? That's a new word to me.
I don't know if I can explain it.
That's not transmigration, is it?
Well, in a form, metapsychosis is conveying to an individual without any personality connection. Well, just like, for example, the midwares want to implant something in your mind. That would be metapsychosis to me.
Hmm.
They don't talk to you, they don't write it out, they don't teach you, but it appears in your subconscious mind.
Superconscious, maybe.
Well, they
Unconscious,
call
for
it
sure.
metapsychosis.
Well, I think that goes on. I think that's how reservists are rehearsed.
I do too. I do too.
And I think they suppose you had a tape library here, which you do have, and there comes a time when you decide to edit your tapes and re-record them. You clean out a lot of scaffolding and save that which is still desirable. All of them? And take out the corny ones. And then you re-record those tapes. And let's say that a generation later it becomes desirable to do this again. And certain things which appeared to be quite pertinent and important a generation earlier no longer seem so significant. So again, you further contract the tapes. Now, of course, you've added something in that intervening generation. What would there be to prevent the conservation of essential planetary knowledge? Through adjuster cooperation between reservists. Let's consider let's hypothesize this. Let's consider a rather solemn occasion in the Reserve Corps of Destiny. A new reservist, a young man, is being initiated into the Corps. And this is also the event of the passing of an old reservist. He's dying. And these two men are asleep. They're not conscious of what's going on. Could be quite widely separated in space. And the two adjusters are detached. And from the adjuster of the dying reservist to the adjuster of the young reservist, there flows a stream of information, the edited tapes, which this reservist did not have occasion to use during his lifetime. And they are conserved in the superconscious mind by re-registry in the young reservist. And I can see how they'd house clean every generation because a lot of stuff wouldn't be of any value anymore. But there would be a continuous retention of edited, essential planetary information in that Reserve Corps of Destiny.
Would do you think the thought adjusters would have to be detached?
I suspect so. I think they'd work easier. They could work as adjusters then.
They rendezvous.
No, that's one technique. And here's another technique.
Don't confuse that with personalized.
No, these are just detached adjusters. It speaks of that in the book.
Temporarily.
Temporarily
That's
detached
right.
for this particular function and purpose. Let's consider another type of happening. I think the Master Seraphim of Planetary Supervision, through the Guardian Angels, group, personal as the case may be, are influential in human thinking. I don't quite know how they operate, but I have symbolized this in my conceptually in this way. Let's compare the content of the human mind to a book. Let the printed pages of the book symbolize the memories which we have. I don't believe that a seraphim goes in and underlines so much as underscores. And if I give you a book that I've studied, and I haven't underscored everything now, the way some of your Ranger books get, but I've just underscored rather discriminatingly. The mere fact that those words are underscored is going to somewhat change your reaction to that book. I once had quite a number of volumes that belonged to a clergyman by the name of Soper. I'd like to have met him, because we think alike. I got these from Blessing's Bookshop, which buy up the libraries of deceased clergymen. And I have many of the same tastes, so I've saved many a dollar at Blessing's. I was always intrigued with what Soper underscored in his books. And after reading a dozen or more that he'd owned, I felt that I knew this man. And I'm sure his underscoring affected my interpretation of the book. Do you get my point? I was not only reading what the author had to say, but I was reading what clergyman Soper felt about it. And an occasional comment like good or disagree, in the margin. Most of the things he disagreed with, I found I disagreed with. I think Soper was a kindred mind. If I ever see a book with that rubber stamp in it, E.W. Soper, I think it was, I'll buy it just to see if Soper's underscored the book, because I enjoyed his underscoring. Example: Gregor Mendel worked out his experiment in plant genetics, and it was forgotten for a generation. It just kind of died with him. And then in one generation, in 1 year, one calendar year, a generation later, 3 scientists independently worked out the same experiment and claimed credit. Later on, they ended their hassle when they discovered Mendel had been at this years earlier. That's why we have Mendel's law. Now, I think this is more than chance that 3 men did the same experiment the same year. I think somebody was doing some underscoring somewhere. I think some things are happenstance and some things are circumstance. And I think we should always be open-minded and ask the questions, but I don't think we should ever try to answer those questions, except in distant retrospect. Example: the authors of Part 4, the Midwares, say that Jesus met Gonad and Ganad in Jerusalem by apparent chance. Those are the exact words. And this tells me something, that they have checked that one out and they can't find where anybody maneuvered it. But they don't believe it was chance. They just have given up, see? It's like the parrot that was watching the magician on the troop transport. This parrot came from New York and was very, very blasé. And every time this magician would pull off a trick, he'd run him down. I saw you how you did that. You had that egg up your sleeve, and so on and so on. Right in the middle of the performance, the Japs threw 3 torpedoes into the transport, and she sunk awful fast. And the magician and the parrot both came up on the same piece of wreckage, and the parrot shook the salt water out of his eyes. He says, "Okay, buddy, I give up. How the hell did you pull that last one?" He said, "Where is the ship?"
Bill, your comment just now about Jesus going down here, back about 10 minutes ago when you were talking about the transmission of information from one brain to another. Somehow or other, I got just a little bit better view right there of how the thought adjuster works. Going back to the fact this information is being transmitted in order to keep it alive so that the individual receiving it can at a particular time use it.
If necessary.
All right?
I don't think that's done for the benefit of the individual. I think it's done for the benefit of the planet.
Well,
the race.
I know. But now, if the thought adjuster of that particular person can convey at the proper time these thoughts that are buried in the subconscious mind to that person, then the thought adjusters that we carry can do the same thing for us.
I wouldn't make a complete comparison there because in the case of a reservist, you also have the active ministry of a secondary midwear, which would not be the case with an average person.
I was thinking that could have been the work of the thought adjuster and their thought adjuster. Bringing them together.
Well, there is.
Who knows? All the midways have simply said we can't explain it.
There is a case in the book where the thought adjuster spoke to his subject and he admonished him.
That's right. That's right.
I forget now what they're talking about, but he did admonish him for
It was a
being lax. He wasn't carrying out his assignments like he should.
It was a thought adjuster of a reservist.
Yeah, must have been.
Now, here is a classic example of how they work. Let's consider Andon and Fana and their problem, which essentially was one of separating themselves, their genes. The only way they can do that is to separate themselves from the Primates tribe. This is important. They didn't have any concept of genes. They just knew that things were getting uncomfortable around there. The tribe was jealous of them. They were too smart. They were uppity. And it was important that they flee, and it was important that they flee northward. That was the only way out of that peninsula.
So it must have been led by something.
The papers specifically state the decision to flee was 100% made by the twins, but the concept of northward was supplied by the life carriers. And I think this is... Yeah, they had nerve. And I think this is true. This is a good illustration of man's relationship to superhuman ministry. I don't think that the good Lord or any of his deputies is going to give you a free tank of gas until at least you've run your tank dry. I don't think there's any use asking for a tank full if you still have gasoline. But if it's important that you do something, and if you have done all that you can do, and that's not enough, then I think you can very confidently expect all the help you need. And again, at the very last sentence, as I recall, in the paper on the local universe, on the divine minister of the local universe says, don't worry about being in a big sweat when you get to a crisis, here or any time in the future. For at every crossroads, the Spirit of truth will always speak, saying, this is the way. In other words, if you've got no geography and you've got to know which way is north, they'll tell you. But you've got to decide to move. What's the use of giving the concept northward if there's no decision to move?
You have to be effective.
Yeah. You have to at least provide the fulcrum of decision on which spiritual levers can operate. No fulcrum, no leverage. These adjutants, I think, have an awful lot to do with determining the whole course of evolution. It's not just the life carriers operating, it's mind operating. Mind operating on living matter. On page 737, last paragraph. I'll give you the number 1, 2,
That's good.
7.
We can find the last.
Yeah. The lower forms of plant life are wholly responsive to physical, chemical, and electrical environment. In other words, the adjustment of a plant is a passive adjustment. Every time the environment takes snuff, the plant sneezes.
Yeah, turn it low. I'm cold.
You are?
Yes, you are. You put your coat off if you're hot.
Let me turn it just 1 degree.
Will not give you my coat. But as the scale of life ascends, one by one, the mind ministries of the 7 adjutant spirits become operative. And the mind becomes increasingly adjustive, creative, coordinative, and dominative. The ability of animals to adapt themselves to air, water, and land is not a supernatural endowment, but it is a superphysical adjustment. And I think by superphysical they simply mean a mindal adjustment. Now let's do a little cross-checking. Let's try page 483, paragraph 11. Page 483, paragraph 11, next to the last paragraph. The liaison of the cosmic mind and the ministry of the adjutant mind spirits evolve a suitable physical tabernacle for the evolving human being. Likewise does the Morantia mind individualize the Morantia form for all mortal survivors. As the mortal body is personal and characteristic for every human being, so will the Morantia form be highly individual. Notice the intensification, more so, and adequately characteristic of the creative mind which dominates it. No 2 Morantia forms are any more alike than any 2 human bodies. The Morantia power supervisors sponsor, and the attending seraphim provide the undifferentiated Morantia material, wherewith the Morantia life can begin to work. To me, we will look the nearest alike when we wake up on the mansion world. And I think very soon our minds will begin to write our character on those Morantia faces. And I think the Morantia body is more plastic than the physical body. Even so, human character is in measure written on human faces.
Now right here, it just tells you that you can't go check out a body.
Well, let me
Morantia.
use a little poetic license. You know,
They're going to
I think they do give you a body of some kind. Burke and I were discussing whether they stockpile these or not, and I don't think it's too important one way or another.
Are you arguing with the 2 words form and body?
No. Just the question is, do they build one for you right there, or do they have them stockpiled? And since I'm used to working with industrial concerns, I would naturally hope that they'd stockpile a few ahead.
That's a tremendous amount of chassis, and here they slap them over.
Right. Now, I think the Moranchi here, the human, let's take a human face. As we grow older, we cannot possibly avoid wrinkles. But we have a choice as to which kind. You get them from frowning and you get them from smiling. And you write a bit of your character on your face.
You get them from sunglasses.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you do about that?
Yeah, you get a bit windblown.
I know, but I'm getting some right there. That's the only reason why I'm getting it.
Now, it goes on to say, and after the Moranchi life, it will be found that spirit forms are equally diverse, personal, and characteristic of their respective spirit-mind indwellers. I have a feeling that as you move away from the physical toward the spiritual, through the Moranchi levels, I think these forms become more and more responsive, more plastic. They respond more quickly to mind action. And I think this is going to be a tremendous stimulus to virtue on the mansion world. In this life, it's possible to appear pretty and be a bit bitchy or bastardy on the inside. And I think the only beauty treatments there are on the mansion world is to espouse virtue.
I didn't think we had to worry about virtue on that.
Well, when you come right down to it,
But that's all settled.
no, I think we're a mix still. It says the first three mansion worlds are making up deficiencies for the most part.
Desire is what goes with you throughout training.
Yeah, I think so.
Seeking for God.
Yes. But I think your techniques are very imperfect, and I don't think your desire is constant. I think it's basic, but not constant. It's not until about the third mansion world that you begin to develop real enthusiasm for the paradise ascent. I think we're ambivalent about many things on the early mansion world. When you consider the condition of servitude in which most human critters die, and then when you stop and think that they get no additional character development between here and there, we get a heap of growing to do, friend, when we wake up there. And if I don't have all my imperfections when I wake up, it's going to shake me because I'm not going to be sure it's me.
Yes.
I mean, if Burke and Clyde and I are out in an Demic scooter, and we're running low on our energy charge, and if Clyde doesn't gripe about taking time out to recharge that battery, I'm not going to believe we're out riding with the Archbishop. See, if he just says, "Well, let's just pull over to the most convenient filling station," I'm going to look at Burke, and she's going to look at me and say, "Well, we thought Goodman made it, but who's this?" See. We thought Goodman made it, but who's this? See?
Somebody looks like it.
Hello, Clyde.
Hello, Craig.
We darn near ran out of gas last night.
Well, I don't know where I would find it in the book, but I think the desire what motivates everybody.
Oh, sure. You want to find God.
Some people hold the desire at the front of them and will consciously work for it. Others push it back and they don't progress it.
Yeah. Abraham believed faintly, and they counted it unto him for righteousness. I don't think that they expect us to be whole-souled. Well, if we get that far, we're going to skip the mansion world. We won't need to go through it. And if we've ended all conflict internally and we have a single purpose to find God, we'll skip the system headquarters too. We'll wake up on the constellation. Because those are the things which they hope to accomplish for us at those stages of our growth. They say that a chance meeting on paradise conveys more to the two people who chance to meet than thousands of years of communication could convey here on this world. And I don't think that is necessarily so much that their language is so much better. It's just that we look as we are. And you just look at a person and with your perception, just the appearance, the form of that person tells you a tremendous lot about them. In this lifetime, we form first impressions. And as we grow older and develop better judgment, I think our first impressions probably we have a better batting average.
You know, my first impressions are wrong, right? Has that been?
Well, I don't take mine too seriously, but I don't have to change them as often as I used to. I mean, I take them as very tentative always.
The thing that I could see I'm positive about is that I'm learning not to form opinions.
If you study Sheldon's work in constitutional psychology, you can form possibly more accurate first impressions if you have a distinctive body build. There's certain probabilities of temperament. Your odds are a little better. You're making book on that person just like making book on horses, but you have a better foundation on which to estimate odds.
You write that down there, Captain.
Oh, don't go into that unless you really want to read a job break.
Chairman of our library committee now, on this project.
Well, put it this way. To take some characters out of Shakespeare that we're all familiar with, Falstaff could not have had a lean and hungry look. This would have been inconsistent with Falstaff's temperament. You know? Falstaff was a lusty character. And Malvolio couldn't have been, kind of buxom and so forth.
Well, if you don't slow down on doing the work the boss that you've been doing, I'm going to feel sorry for you.
What?
Wouldn't you hate to miss the first 3 words?
Brother, you want to...
Or more?
Would you like a guarantee that I'll make it?
Oh, I'm not,
Would you like a professional opinion that I'll wake up on the first mansion world? I'll give you my home phone number, and I imagine Flo's in bed with a bad cold, and she'll certify that I'll make the first mansion world.
I don't know.
You have to make each one of them step by step.
Let's just skip them all.
Well, skip how many?
All 7.
Well,
Possible.
You can skip all 7.
Advanced sociologically or become socially advanced enough to
Listen.
at this stage of evolution, human evolution.
Well, you technically go through the first 2 or 3. If you go through them at all, you will technically go through all of them. But you might just be there for a 30-day period, which would be the equivalent of skipping.
Well, that'd be the time that you kept me.
Yes, I think so, because here, stop and consider the different cultural levels. Now, let's just project 3 cultural levels. Let's go back to the days of Andon as representing a very primitive world. Let's take Andon and Fonda. Then let's take any one of us. Then let's take some citizen of the planet Nova, which is the number 1 planet in the system of Satania, hence the oldest. And let's say that we've got 3 people. We've got Andon and Clyde and a guy by the name of Johansson from Nova. And they all die at 3:15 this afternoon. Clyde, you get quarter of an hour left. So listen carefully. And they all are going to go to the first mansion world. In other words, this guy Johansson from Manova isn't far enough advanced to skip all 7. He could skip all 7 and land on Jerusalem. They all wake up on mansion world number 1. Now I think Andon has got a lot more to learn than Clyde has. But I think Clyde has got a lot more to learn than Johansson has. And that's why they have 7 mansion worlds, is to provide for an equalizing reception. And let's just split it 3 ways. Let's say that Andon takes it up on the first mansion world. Clyde and Johansson stick around for the 30-day period, which is a technical requirement. Then they both go on to the second mansion world. And then at the end of 30 days, Johansson goes on to the third mansion world. Of course, he might go on even farther. And that would be a differential reception, even though all 3 would technically pass through all 7. And you might keep on moving until you wound up on the 5th, 6th, or even 7th. Now, if you go beyond that, you don't wake up on the first mansion world. You wake up on Jerusalem itself. You bypass all 7.
I just think, I think at this stage, human evolution, it's possible that some people go, perhaps, to the third, fourth mansion world after the process.
I would be sure of the second. I think I have less to learn on the first mansion world than a person that comes from a much more primitive society. That to me is obvious. I can read back in our planetary history.
Well, I had in mind people like White.
Yeah, I think he might go farther than we will. Yes. I would say, I would guess that Urantians would be scattered all over the 7 mansion worlds and where they pick up. But I doubt that very many of them, if any, bypass all 7 mansion worlds.
Bill, are you familiar with Mahatma theory and religion?
A little bit, not too much.
What is your opinion of Mahatma? I mean, judgment.
I think he survived, no question about it.
Do you think he was a reservist?
No, I think he was an idealist. I know he was an idealist.
I think he was a
I think it was
reservist.
a brilliant answer.
Well, I can't argue with you, Chafing. I have no real reason for believing he wasn't.
See, he accomplished all he did without force.
That's not typical of
He
reservists.
sold, they took him to England.
Yeah.
And he sold them on the idea, not through force. He was fasting. He was going to die.
Yeah.
Well, did you know
They couldn't afford to let that happen, you
Did
see?
he spend 20 or 30 years of his life in South Africa
Yeah.
before he come back to India?
Yeah.
But now he was fasting.
Ma'am,
He didn't recognize Jesus.
nobody recognized God.
He recognized that, but he did not recognize Jesus.
Well, he rejected Jesus as a part of his rejection of Christianity. You'll remember his terrible indictment of Christians
Now,
when he said, if Christians had loved me as much as they profess to love my soul, I would long since have become a Christian.
now what do we learn about the Jews? They recognize God, they don't recognize Jesus.
Well, the book says this, Wilma. It says that Jesus does not require men to believe in him or on him, but with him. Jesus' only requirement was that men believe in the Father. He never required that men believe in him.
One of his main objectives to come down here to live a perfect life.
In essence, to demonstrate what God would be like were God a creature of flesh and blood.
Not to expect us to live a perfect life.
That's correct, yes. An inspiration, but not a pattern.
Well, what was his argument with the Jews?
Well, his arguments were with their outmoded ceremonial system of worship. with their sacrificial system. I don't think Jesus ever.
You think it was based, that his argument with the Jews was based on their belief in, did you say the outmoded,
Yes, I think Jesus was trying to carry the God concept forward to a non-sacrificial concept.
you know, Bill, in the last 3 days it has suddenly occurred to me an understanding of why in the card from to get permission to publish the fourth section in the book. It is the controversial part of this book that helps people away from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, they never had trouble with
Jesus makes some statements in there that's, I don't know where to find it in the book. Jesus talks to them about their dogma and tradition that they'll have to be released from. I've got it underscored in my book, but I don't know where to find it.
I'll read it to you here. It's page 2089, last paragraph. 2, 3, 4.
Jesus does not require his disciples
Mm-hmm.
to believe in him, but rather to believe with him. One more song. One more.
You see, Wilma, you wouldn't expect such a divine personality as Christ to be egocentric. He didn't make himself an issue. Jesus tried to do this. If that wall symbolized our spiritual blindness, then he tried to cut a window in that wall and put a pane of clear glass so that we could see through that wall, through him, to God. And I don't think he was interested in coloring that glass with his own self. He repeatedly said, "Not my will, but yours be done." He was not trying to show how Michael would live a life. He was trying to show how the universal Father would operate.
Otherwise would have refused.
Yes. The issue is not Christ. The issue is God. Now, his followers made Christ an issue. Jesus never made that an issue. And they're not to be blamed. They did this in good faith, with good intent. They were excited about him, and who wouldn't have been? Peter had no malice when he got up and preached the sermon that unwittingly shifted the whole teaching away from Jesus' intent. He didn't preach what Jesus told him to preach, which was the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Peter was excited, and he told a story about the crucified and risen Christ. This was news. And he spoke out of the fullness of his heart. And Peter's not to be condemned for this. But it did change religious evolution on this planet. It shifted things from the religion of Jesus to the religion about Jesus.
Well, that's hard for this.
It sure is. Yes, it is.
You made a statement I was very intrigued. You were talking about reservists.
Yes.
What did you mean about the characteristic of reservists?
Oh, are you familiar with reservists as they're depicted in the book?
Yes, and their own way.
You'll recall that there's something less than 1,000 of them at the present time, or at the time of the publication, 900 some odd, and that they're variously assigned to the 12 departments of seraphic government: progress, churches, science, education, and so forth. Generally speaking, these men do not function in a prominent way. They are insurance policies. They are rehearsed to function in a time of crisis. The more prominent the headline, the more doubtful I am that this is a reservist, although it might be sometimes they cash in their insurance. But when the planetary authorities put a reservist in the breach, they are taking their last-ditch stand. They're using their reserves. They're committing their reserves. And a good general does not commit his reserves lightly, because then he has lost his tactical power of maneuver. And I don't think that the function of reservists necessarily triumphs. I think the odds may be too great. I've thought about the function of the Reserve Corps of Destiny in the later days of the Roman Empire. And I'll bet you a cookie that the Angels of Nation Life had all the reservists they could get in action there. And it wasn't enough to hold the line. And don't ever think that the Germans defeated the Romans. The Romans defeated themselves. The last real Roman that commanded on the Rhine was Julian, who almost overnight transformed himself from a philosopher to a general. And what he did to those barbarians is what Paddy gave the drum. I mean, he chased them something over kettle right across the Rhine. He cleared Gaul. And then what happened? His legions proclaimed him Augustus. And then he had to fight the other Augustus. This was the defeat of Rome. He was the last real Roman to command along the Rhine.
Well, Napoleon went through the same experience.
Bill, while you're on that subject, do you find in the papers a reason or an explanation, or do you feel from the papers a reason for the dearth of reservists that are conscious of their identity?
I have no opinion on that. There are less than a dozen.
Less than 12,
Yeah.
I believe.
Out of this 900
Or
odd.
less than 2 scores. Less
Yes.
than a score. What's
That's
a score?
20.
20.
Yeah.
Less than 20.
Mhm.
That's the dirt to me out of the house. I mean, that's
You can always remember.
very few.
You can always remember it, Clyde. It's your fingers and your toes.
Count to 20 anyway.
Just big.
I've been waiting all afternoon for that. What you did to me out in the kitchen. Chasing around.
Mouse that here.
I don't know why that is. I think,
Darn it, Clarence and Moore. I mean,
well, I don't know that
I worry a little about it. Really,
I suspect, Clyde, they have all they need.
12,
Yeah.
18, 17.
Yeah, for the most part, it seems to me these reservists can function just as well, even if they don't know their status. They're still there. They're ready. They're rehearsed. All these tapes have been recorded. And they can be activated. As an example, I'll tell you a person I think was a reservist. I think Lincoln was. And stop and think how quickly he was catapulted from relative obscurity to the presidency of the United States. Yeah. I mean, he'd been a captain in the Black Hawk War. He'd been a congressman. And then he had some publicity in his debates with Douglas, but he lost the election. And then all of a sudden, boom, the Republican Party meets for its second convention. And he gets the nomination and wins on a plurality. And if I were to speculate as to what he was rehearsed to do, I would guess just two things: preserve the Union and abolish slavery. And those two things he did rather effectively, and he wasn't too hot at many other things. He had an awful hard time finding generals.
Pretty sorry, General.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He was no great shakes as a strategist. The only smart man in Washington that first year was Winfield Scott, and he was so old nobody paid any attention to him. But that's how they won the war eventually.
Can you name some prior ones?
Somewhat.
In your opinion.
I'm always I'm always suspicious of religious generals. Generals that are deeply religious and they're awfully good commanders. I'm never sure, but I'm suspicious.
Stonewall, friend?
I thought of Stonewall. I don't know. I feel sure of Lincoln. See, they would be working for the seraphim of nation life. And I've often thought, for the sake of this union, it's a good thing that he was not present at Gettysburg. If he'd been at Gettysburg, it might have been a different story. Have you all read this? Cantor's book, If the South Had Won the Civil War. McKinley Cantor. It's in a paperback. And
If the South.
If the South Had Won the Civil War. He wrote Andersonville, and it's a cute little piece of science fiction.
Well, it was published in one of the magazines.
Yeah.
Serial.
Well, it's very interesting to read. It's a lot of fun. He picks up the story about May of 1863 and just has a couple of things turned differently and then takes it from there. Oklahoma plays quite a prominent part in the later history of the United States.
Go on that route.
Oh, yeah.
Does it mention Billings Gate?
No.
It's all hypothetical.
Yeah. I wouldn't know who other reservists might be, and I don't think they function for the most part. I think they live and die unhonored and unsung. And I suspect that is one of the prime qualifications of a reservist. He's got to have an ego that isn't too hungry for expression. He's got to be willing.
This is his value once he sees it and responds.
His career is apt to be passive. He is a reservist, not an activist. He is an insurance policy. And you don't lightly cash in your insurance.
But he has to have great intention.
He probably has a thought adjuster that has had experience in a given field. And then, of course, he would get that adjuster because he had aptitudes and capacities which that adjuster could be utilized.
You thought of one drawback there, Bill, you were speaking a while ago about these different ones, being one perhaps in religion and one in science and so forth and so on. It's hardly possible that the religionists would have a thought adjuster as he was.
I don't know. I see no reason why he shouldn't.
Well,
Jesus did.
yes, but
Don't forget now, the fact that a thought adjuster has experience does not mean the non-survival of the human of its previous indwelling.
But ordinarily the thought adjuster is not experienced unless the person who is first served has been lost.
No. How about spirit fusion?
Non-breeder.
Or primitive mortals, or others that we don't know about. In another local universe that's a neighbor of ours, only half the mortals are adjuster fused. 50% are spirit fused. And the adjuster gets the same quality of experience in a non-fusion candidate as in a fusion candidate. And those beings survive by spirit fusion. On the other hand, Wilma, I think some adjusters gain experience through non-survivors. I think this comes both ways.
I don't think you're religious. Long shot.
That's a good point. I'm not disposed to argue with you at all on that point.
You might have some religions that turn bitter at the very last and reject God and so forth, but hard to call that.
I would prefer to say they probably indwell spirit-fused ascenders. Seems more likely. Now, these reservists, to me, are a very fascinating group because this involves the technique of the origin of these papers. And as the papers themselves say.
They're pretty perfect. Our lives right now.
Well, I hope they don't function. Because if they function, we are in trouble. We're in serious trouble. And I suspect there's a price paid for the function of a reservist. Let me share with you a theory. And I offer this very tentatively because you will find nothing like this in the Blue Book. But I've done a lot of thinking about the function of the Supreme Being in the evolutionary universes. The Supreme Being is ubiquitous, which means he's all over the lot. He's many-present, not omnipresent, but he's many-present. And I don't think he's any respecter of persons, any more than God is. And I don't think he's any respecter of planets, or cultures, or peoples, or nations. And I have a feeling that he is an equalizer of obstacles and an equalizer of challenges. And that's one of the reasons why the powers that be are very careful about what they do in intervening in planetary affairs. Because I suspect that if they do a great deal, the Supreme Being will react in a compensatory way. In other words, if you get a break, then the Supreme Being will interpose an obstacle to equalize that break. Now, I don't visualize the Supreme Being as sitting up on the pilot world of the outer Havana circuit and saying, well, Goodman struck oil, we'll fix his clock. No. To me, this would be more like a spinal reflex, an automatic reaction that is inherent in the presence of the Supreme in time and space. Just an equalizing technique.
That's the sort of mind that the practice
Yeah. Well, take, for example, consider the spiritual privileges inherent in knowing Jesus personally. Think what a break the 12 apostles had. Now let's skip the Alphaeus twins. They went back to their fishnet. But let me ask you a question. Consider the lives of the other 10. Were they more tranquil or less tranquil for having known Jesus? Much less, yes.
Well, would the same thing apply to being a member of the forum?
I wouldn't know. I only ask these questions. I don't try to answer. We're speculating now. There's nothing in the Blue Book about this. When we're on the Blue Book, I'll quote you because I've got authority. But here I'm a fellow pupil. See, I'm just asking questions. I'd rest my case on the lives of the 10. You consider what befell those 10 men as a consequence of knowing Jesus. Just temporally now. Consider them from an economic, an emotional, and a temporal standpoint. I'm sure that none of them would have swapped the experience for the privilege of knowing him. But I have a feeling they paid for knowing him. I think they paid. Few of them lived to an old age.
You mean they was charged with more responsibility?
They were given more help. It was inherent just living with a creator son for 4 years, JB, would be something.
You know, much to you.
Of course it is. One committed suicide, and the 9 survivors, few of them died a natural death.
But you don't know what happened to Alfred.
I assume they did. Let's leave them out. Leave them out. They couldn't be asked to do more than they could do.
That cuts down to 9.
Yeah, well, it cuts us down to 10. Judas failed.
Well, we know Judas, no
Yeah.
Judas.
Well, let's see now. John died a natural death. Nathaniel did. Simon Zelotes did. Who else? Andrew was killed. Peter was crucified. James was beheaded. Philip died with his wife.
We have a chart that
Yeah.
gives each disciple when he was buried and how he died and everything. You have
John died of old age. John died of old age. Nathaniel died of old age in India. Simon Zelotes died of old age. Read it.
All right, Andrew crucified. Peter crucified. James put to death with a sword by Herod Agrippa. John died in 101. Philip crucified. Nathaniel died in India. Matthew killed of the Jews. Thomas put to death at Malta. And James and Judas Alphaeus went back to their sickness. And Simon Zelotes died in Africa, an old man. So now
Except for
maybe
the Alphaeus
one,
twins, 3
two,
died of old age. 3 out of 10. 6.
And then there's Simon Zelotes to be one.
5.
6 were killed and 1
Six were
suicide.
killed, 6 were killed.
Now, I submit that's a much higher rate of violent death than would be statistically probable at that time.
And of course, in addition to them, wasn't there 2 lives that took death?
Yeah.
Judas' life.
Yeah. Now again, I think we should look at this possibility broadly. Not only from a temporal standpoint, but from a universe standpoint. When Jesus viewed the imprisonment of John the Baptist, he was not being callous. He merely had a longer-range perspective than some of his followers, or some of John's followers, who were troubled by this. As to whether John lived long years or short weeks in the Maccabeus fortress was really not important, was it? In view of John's future in the universe. Now, that's a hard thing for a human being to grasp, especially if it's you that's in jail or a good friend of yours that's in jail. But from a larger standpoint, it's not too important, is it?
We hold it.
The papers asked a question, Wilma, in one of the papers on.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Now, they asked a question in one of the papers in Part 3 on religion. They say, to a God-knowing kingdom believer, what does it matter if all things earthly crash?
And Bill, now on the surface of that thing, I go to the same country. I'm just as curious that if I knew that I don't die and look out, it wouldn't bother me. But I react sometimes to refute that.
Oh, of course. This is the animal urge to live. And it's a good urge, Wilma. It keeps us alive.
You know that in your head, but getting your heart to believe it
Yeah.
is another thing. Yes, it is.
But again, it's all things. I don't know how many of us are conscious inside. Bring that knowledge home. And feel it as well as know it.
There's an old Marine Corps lesson which I value, and that's just this: you only have to die once. They make quite a point of that, and if you worry about it, then emotionally speaking, you die so many times. And they never pretended it was easy or enjoyable. And therefore, why bother about it except that one time? when you have to die. And they put it this way. The only bullet that will ever hit you is the one that has your initials on it. And if it doesn't have your initials on it, you don't have to be worried. And if it's got your initials on it, there's no use ducking because it'll get you on the ricochet. Now that's Stoicism in simple language. And I think a touch of Stoicism is a good outer works for a religious philosophy. I don't think it's a good inner works. I think that should be religious. But I think a touch of Stoicism is helpful. You only have to die once. So why fuss about it?
But for that to really maintain Christ consciousness, you got to work it and put it.
Sure.
That's hard.
Here is something else that I think is helpful. I think sleep is a rehearsal for death. Each night, you lie down, you surrender consciousness. You have absolutely no assurance that you'll awaken, do you? No. And I think a mature religionist should view death with the same confidence that a human being views sleep.
Well, it's just like
You're just contrary, Bert. Listen, we've come a long ways from the seven adjutant mind spirits.
Well, it's been interesting.
Well, I think that if discussing these things is relieved, someone's finding a group or something.
Sure. I don't particularly want to die, but I believe I can honestly say I'm unafraid to die.
I think I am.
I think this: if you trust if you trust God, I don't think you can consistently fear death. I fear mutilation. I have a healthy fear of being just partly here, minus some essential equipment. I mean, this I really fear. But to me, death is so inescapable. It's so beyond worry. And if you really trust God, how can you fear death?
When I have friends or know of people who are killed instantly and all, I always think,
Oh, that's a good way.
what's it,
Yes.
like Chloe Carter's daughter last week killed instantly. She's done a good deed. She went out to ask some folks to come in to eat with them because they had been out there so long. They found them dead out. And she's the person that always worried about people having food and eating and were they hungry and all. And she went back out and asked them to come in.
Hmm.
It was a wonderful way to die.
Yes. This is good.
She had love in her heart.
You know?
Well, we don't know if it comes to it now. We're going to get it. So what?
That's nice. That's nice.
It is for a fact. You know, you just think of a small percentage of people that is given the right to know when they will die, like cancer. I thought this the other day in connection with Bill Alexander, the sister's pastor, has cancer in her stone. And he is given the opportunity of knowing in a year, he said. And it's speaking for what I'm
Bill had the opportunity of saying, and Bill himself, Bill Alexander, had a second or 10 seconds. You know,
Oh, you have
5 seconds. So there was
because I'm sure until they crash, he's still talking full knowledge that that's how it comes out.
Yeah, he was an optimist. That's a much better way to die.
He didn't take a gamble when he got here. He's been told that it's the way to get it or something. That's what they're doing. He didn't take a gamble.
But just go back to your experience with sleep. You go to sleep without fear. You have no assurance you'll wake up. And to me, each night of sleep should act as an effective rehearsal for the sleep of death.
I never thought of it doing that. Boy, I'm a sound sleeper. It puts me in a hurry, but now you like me, you like purple. Don't fight it.
I'm not like once I get
a little trouble.
I can just see Burke Seraphim on the first Mansion World saying, my, did that soul give me a lot of trouble trying to get over here kicking and stumping around?
I think it's definitely a personal trial. You know, your problem. That's like Bill said a while ago. You can, you can work with yourself and you can educate yourself.
Consciously you can now, but subconsciously do you?
Well, do you have a choice, Wilma?
No, Bill, I admit that.
We just don't have a choice in this matter. I don't think there's anybody here that enjoys the prospect of death. But it's so inescapable.
You know, we should think of death in two ways, physical and spiritual.
Yeah.
We should absolutely separate death into
Oh,
two categories.
I do in my
I
thinking.
criticize the church for not doing that.
Mhm.
I think when a minister speaks to death, he should make it plain he's speaking of spiritual death. Because that's what ministers talk about, is spiritual death.
Death is almost inevitable. You could make it
One day
diffusion.
in time, it's
You could make it diffusion. You don't absolutely have to die. It's not quite as inescapable as taxes. Do you want to talk about mind in a larger sense? Since we're being minded today. I think of mind, it's a peculiar reality, but then so is matter and so is spirit. Each has its unique properties, and they're all three so different. I think of mind as coming from the third source and center, and that's pretty high potency mind. Now don't hair split on me now, because I'm going to make some real crude illustrations. But I think of that as kind of 440 volt mind. But I think of that as kind of 440 volt mind. They don't have commercial circuits, very many that run 440 volts, but I think there's some in the military use that. Now I think the seven master spirits downstep that mind to 220. That's cosmic mind. It's a lower voltage. It's not absolute mind. I think the creative spirit of a local universe downstepped it to 110 volts. And I think the adjutant mind spirit still further downstepped that 110 voltage, which is standard voltage for Nebadon, into a still lower voltage for use on our level. I think all the time we're dealing with the same, with roughly the same reality. I'm not too sure about that. Now, if we tag in here, we're getting into material mind. As we move up from here, we leave our clothesline behind. This seven-stranded clothesline, which little by little, strand by strand, got in here, and I suspect our mind recapitulated the evolution of the species with intuition starting first. and with wisdom functioning last. I think when wisdom functioned, that was the first moral decision that a child makes on the average in its 5th year, and that brings the thought adjuster. And then you have a complete functioning human mind. And prior to that time, I think that child ascends the 7 mind levels, just as the species ascended. I think a new baby has got nothing more than the adjutant of intuition working. And there's very little that a new baby can do. It can suck, it can hang on, and it will scream if frightened by loud noises. And I guess that's about all that a baby's born with. And it'll yell if it's uncomfortable. It knows pain. When we get up to the mansion world, then I think we start operating on 110 volts, or some modification of it. And I think we're now operating at a different level of the consciousness of the creative spirit of the local universe. I think we should always remember the definition of mind given in the foreword. Oh dear. At the bottom of page 9, mind is a phenomenon connoting the presence activity of living ministry in addition to varied energy systems. Now don't forget that there is such a thing as mindal energy, just as there is physical energy and just as there is spiritual energy. And pure mind obeys neither the laws of physical matter nor spiritual reality. It obeys its own laws. But mind as we know it in function always means that someone is ministering mind to the being who has that mind. And I think of it roughly as the creative spirit at 110 volts, the master spirits at 220, and the third source and center at 440. We're ignoring supreme mind in this comparison.
Where would you place it?
Somewhere between 220 and 440. Or maybe as a synthesis of all the 7 kinds of 220 volt minds. As a composite of all 7 manifestations of cosmic mind.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah. Yes.
Our objective brain and mind. And most of us, I think, end up
I suppose.
this mind you're speaking of now would be that you would start all knowing.
Yeah, it's a descending thing. It's a descending thing. There's a peculiarity of mind. There are no creatures of pure mind. There are creatures of pure spirit. Persons. There are spirits who have mind. And then there are pure spirits like adjusters who don't have mind. Always remember that the Universal Father, I'm coming to this, always remember that neither the Universal Father nor the Eternal Son have mind, because they're antecedent to the Infinite Spirit who is the source of mind. But the Father thinks and the Son thinks. And that's the explanation of the mysterious statement, which is made in the papers. You don't have to add mind to spirit.
They don't have mind.
They are minded. They are thinking with something which is ancestral to mind. Spirit alone is conscious, and may be personal if so endowed with personality. You don't have to add mind to spirit. You may if you choose. The seraphim has mind, and the seraphim is a spiritual being. A thought adjuster has a mindedness, but does not have mind. That's why you can't reflect the mindedness of a thought adjuster. When the discerners of spirits who work for the universal censors, you remember their secondary Sekanophim, they can reflect the presence of the thought adjuster and pronounce that this is a divine entity, but they cannot reflect what the thought adjuster is thinking about. The thought adjuster is impenetrable to reflectivity. Well, I think it's kind of fun. I don't think they should know everything. There wouldn't be any mysteries left. The thought adjuster is a pure energy being. The papers speak of the thought adjuster as a pure spirit. They might just as well speak of the thought adjuster as a pure energy, because the thought adjuster, being a fragment of the Father, comes off at a level which is before you have a separation of matter and spirit.
You don't know.
The thought adjuster is all-knowing. The Father, I don't think so.
The Father is not all-knowing.
The Father is all-knowing, yes.
Father.
I think the thought adjuster may be all-knowing in the existential sense, but not in the experiential sense, because he learns out here in time and space and acquires the experiential knowledge. The thought adjuster may be encircuited with existential all-knowingness, but I'm sure is not all-knowing experientially.
Well,
Huh? The human, well, you've got a mixed deal there. Sometimes, let's talk about him after the baptism. Sometimes Jesus chose to know only what the human Jesus would know, and sometimes he elected to avail himself of the consciousness of Michael.
well, he's much in the same position that our thought adjusters are, but being experienced by his soul.
Yes,
The thought
that's true.
adjuster being
Yes,
experienced by his
that's
soul.
right. That's right. For example, let's consider a hypothetical situation. We're told that humor is a function of reversion to a lower state of existence. That's one of the functions. That's reversion, rather. Humor apparently is a time-space proposition. I suspect that humor is inherent in experiential growth. I would question that humor would be indigenous to paradise experience. Now, I equally suspect that any bona fide personality has the capacity for humor, the potential for humor. Now let's just take an imaginary for instance. On all planets that have been isolated by rebellion, when a bestowal sun comes and goes, the command of seraphim on that planet is assumed by a volunteer primary supernaphim from paradise. We have such a primary supernaphim here on Urantia. She's the second to serve, and this job has been filled by primary supernaphim for the last 1900 years. Let's say that this supernaphim came out 1,000 years ago from paradise. and this is her first excursion in time and space. I would bet dollars to donuts that when she left paradise, she had no active sense of humor. And I would be equally willing to give odds that after 1,000 years of service on Urantia, she has developed a sense of humor. Because I think it was potential in her. Well, I'm talking about real humor. I don't mean cruel humor. Now, I'll bet a cookie if she finishes her tour of duty out here and returns to paradise and tells a funny story to one of her colleagues who's never left domestic service, that her colleague will simply look blankly when she comes to the point of the story.
English.
Yeah.
You think they're all
Now, there are many things, I think, that are available in the experiential universes that are not available on paradise. For example, I can see one possible reason that such a Supernathin might volunteer for service. Well, I can see at least two. One, adventure. She's a personality. Personalities are adventurous beings. She's just as much a personality as we are. She gets it from the same place we do, the Father. And then I can see another possibility. I think she might be looking for God. Not existential deity on paradise. She knows the Father, Son, and Spirit. She was born on paradise. But experiential deity, evolving out in time and space. I don't think the Supreme Being is discoverable on paradise. But the evidences of the Supreme would be findable out here in the experiential universe.
Well, she had to be a very mindful person.
Well, they're pretty smart. You know, they function as custodians of knowledge and masters of philosophy interchangeably, okay? As well as directors of conduct and worship.
And that's a nice shooting high. You can't see those things.
Mind, as we know it, mediates between matter and spirit. And the minute you look at reality below the level of the Father, you have a dual manifestation of reality. Paradise, the Isle of Paradise, and the eternal Son. And mind becomes inevitable as the correlator of the material and the spiritual. The Son being the absolute expression of the Father's spiritual nature, and paradise being the absolute expression of the Father's non-spiritual nature. And don't forget that paradise is more than a thing. Paradise is minded in some way. And the papers put it most intriguingly when they say paradise is not minded as any creature could ever possibly comprehend the meaning of such a word. Now, how nicely they've said what they said. There's not much use thinking about it. But paradise is more than a non-living machine. As they say, the substance of paradise is neither alive nor dead. It's absolutum. On paradise, we have mind, but mind has no reconciling function between matter and spirit, because there is no qualitative difference between paradise material energy and paradise spiritual energy. You'll recall, paradise spirit and Monota cannot be in any way differentiated except by name. If it comes from the Isle, they call it Monota, and if it comes from the deities, they call it paradise spirit, and that's the only difference, just the name. When you get to Havona, There's plenty of difference. Spirit is one thing, triata, Havona material is another thing, and Havona mind is something yet again. But there's no disharmonies. There is a qualitative difference between matter, mind, and spirit in the central universe, but there is no clashing between the three. There must be a harmony of original perfection there. But the minute you come out into Orvanton and its sister creations, you've got a different story. There is no seeming unity between material evolution and spiritual purpose, at least as you get down to the fine details. And here, I think, is the great function of mind as the correlator of matter and spirit. And here is the great challenge of the present universe age. In the time-space creations, energy matter is dominant, except in personality, where spirit, through the mediation of mind, is striving for the mastery. And this is the whole secret, I think, of human survival, of the settling of a planet in light and life, and of the settling of the seven super-universes in light and life, and of the emergence of the Supreme Being. It's all wrapped up in that simple statement, that complex statement.
This is a unifier.
Yeah, it's the tool which spirit can use to whip matter. Spirit, as such, can't do anything about matter. Spirit doesn't touch matter at any point. Spirit is basic purpose in the universe. But how can spirit impose its purpose on a physical universe? Only through mind. What kind of mind? Personality mind. Because only personality has the power of choice, which can say to mind, you mind, which can dominate matter, shall now become subordinate to spirit.
Well, it would unify on sub-absolute levels and only.
Sure. This is true in human experience. This is true in the experience of an individual mortal. This can be true in the experience of a people or a nation or a planet. You don't get rich and powerful by praying. You achieve these desirable ends, perhaps, by working. And what do you use when you work? You use mind. Now, if you become strong, then what attitude will your strength produce in other people? Well, if you're just plain strong and unrestrained, then your strength will beget fear. But if you should be strong and at the same time meek and restrained, then your strength would beget no fear. And there, I think, is the meaning of Jesus' statement. The meek shall inherit the earth. He never said they couldn't be strong. Yeah. But only the strong who are also meek could keep the inheritance. Otherwise, they'd go the way of Prussia, Assyria, or any other group that is strong without conscience. You can call quite a list. Those who live by the sword eventually die by it. Should we have a break?
Right here, and now.
Turn it off, Bert.
Turn it off, Bert. Turn it off.
You want my credit card?
Turn it off, Bert. Stretch. 10 minutes stretch.
Resistance about taking advice from other people has a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
We learn it by experience.
Well, Wilma, if we agree with him, he's courageous, and if we disagree, he's stubborn. It's about that simple. It's a fine line between integrity and stubbornness. It's a very fine line. The same strength which gives